My boots squished up the hill, each step staining the treads in blood. I barely even registered it. The wind reeked of rotting flesh and copper, a warm tongue that blew my dark hair off my forehead. The red ocean that surrounded the island was loud today, red froth lapping across the black sand. "Where are you, brother?" I muttered to myself, eyes scanning the expanse of the island as I crested the hill. I had traveled along the coast for hours, sure I would find him fishing monsters from the soupy sea or collecting their corpses from the beach. My search had been fruitless, and the weather was turning. I needed to get back home. I spotted a gore pole a couple 100 yards away, standing alone at the top of a distant rise. I started walking toward it, the flesh beneath my feet squelching. I gagged as another gust of wind smacked my face, bringing with it the foul stench that rose from the island. As I went, careful not to slip, I realized that my brother and I had been here for 5 years now. 5 long years of watching the ocean, speaking to the flags, waiting for the hell they warned was coming. I reached the bottom of a hill and strode quickly through the long tufts of black hair that grew like grass. The pores they sprouted from looked like infected scabs in the pink skin that covered the island. A land of flesh, bone, and gore. 5 years we had lived among the stink, surrounded by the horrible sea that brought horrors crawling up the shore with each storm. As I made my way across the barren, fleshy landscape, I realized that I hadn't yet checked the tunnel today. I looked at the angry, darkening clouds that were forming on the horizon. I needed to get back to the house quickly and check it to make sure the tunnel was still sealed before the storm came. The island always bared its sharpest fangs during the storms. I trotted the rest of the way to the gore pole, huffing and puffing as I climbed the hill it stood upon. When I reached the top, I craned my head back and stared up at the 100-foot pole, no thicker than my forearm. There were 15 of these poles scattered across the island, and to this day I still didn't understand them fully, but they were useful. I rapped my knuckles on the metal pole, the only thing on the island that wasn't made of skin or bone. I waited a moment and then knocked again. I looked at the sky, waiting. "Come on, you bastards, hurry up." A moment later, I saw what I had beckoned. It was a sheet of flesh that blustered on the wind, 2 feet by 3. It drifted and fluttered closer, dancing on the wind like a lost sheet of newspaper. When it reached the top of the gore pole, it snapped onto it, fluttering like a flag at the height of it. "Hey, down here," I called. The veiny rectangle of flesh slid down the pole to my level. I found myself staring at the stretched face that filled the flag. Its mouth had no teeth, its eye sockets were huge and empty, and its nose was cut off at the bridge, leaving 2 small black holes.
"Who are you?"
the flag asked in a gentle voice. "My name is Rennie. Can you help me out?" I had never spoken to the same one twice and had no idea where they came from or how many there were. They always came from the clouds, and not once in 5 years had the clouds broken to see beyond. Perhaps there was a whole other world up there where the flags lived. The flag fluttered gently in the breeze, its skin a spiderweb of veins.
"What do you need?"
"I'm looking for my brother. There's a storm coming and I need to find him." The flag suddenly shot up the gore pole where it wavered for a few seconds before sliding back down, its dark sockets unblinking.
"Yes, there's a bad one coming. Going to be bad. Bad, bad. Why are you here?"
They always ask this. I didn't have time to get into it. "Have you seen another that looks like me? Could you look?"
"You want me to help you?"
"Yes, it's important."
"Stupid. Stupid, stupid. You shouldn't be on the island. It's bad. Bad, bad."
"I know," I said, gritting my teeth. "But if my brother and I don't watch the tunnel, it could get a lot worse." The flag flicked itself on the pole, making a loud crack in the air.
"Stupid, stupid. Can't stop the storms when they want to go to the tunnel. Foolish, foolish. Go back where you came from. I don't want to help you. You are ugly."
I forced myself to take a breath. The flags were usually a pain in the ass. "Look," I said, "could you please travel to the other gore poles and tell me if you see my brother? It won't take long, and then I'll leave you alone."
"You are a bother. Bother, bother. I don't want to help you. You are ugly.
On impulse, I reached out and grabbed the flag, bunching its flat face in my fist like a wet towel. Its skin was cold and slimy. Say you'll help me, or I'll rip you off this pole and use you to wipe my ass for the next decade. The flag's voice was muffled around my fist.
Fine, fine. Only playing. I will look for the one who looks like you.
And then come back and tell me what you see.
Yes, yes. Won't be long.
I let the flag go and it snapped itself loudly again as if to get the wrinkles out of its face. The flag began to race up the gore pole again to take flight.
You are still ugly.
It called down to me once more before detaching itself to let the wind take it. The wind pushed the strange creature away from me toward the next gore pole, the flag's landing perches. I anxiously tapped my foot, little puddles of blood splashing. I looked toward the red ocean and the wall of black cloud that continued to form on the horizon. Not good. I winced as the wind gusted up toward me from the beach, particles of black sand hitting my cheeks like little needle points. I could see horrors, small ones crawling out of the ocean, black things with dozens of eyes and tentacles. I could hear their moans in the wind. I looked back to the sky. I wasn't worried about them. They'd die before they could crawl 100 feet, just like they always did. But the storm would bring bigger ones, meaner ones, and I needed to get home and make sure the tunnel was still sealed before they inevitably reached it. After the last storm, I knew the tunnel didn't have much longer before it was split wide open. It was weak, battered, sliced, and dying. Storms had been terrible the past month. This place was pushing back, sensing how close it was to breaking through. I knew my brother and I couldn't hold out much longer. It was a miracle we had made it this long. The tunnel didn't have time to heal anymore. The storms and horrors had been coming too frequently, too brutally. And what happens when it ruptures? I cast the thought aside as I saw the flag returning. Well, that was quick, I muttered as it blew to the gore pole and attached its flesh to the top. It quickly slid down to my level and looked annoyed.
Found the other ugly creature that looks like you. Ugly, ugly.
Where? I asked, taking a step forward.
2 gore poles to the south. It was heading toward the structure by the marshes.
2 gore poles to the south. He was heading back home. That was good. What the hell had he been up to? If he hadn't been fishing for horror bait, especially with a storm coming, then I couldn't imagine what he had been doing. Okay, thank you, I said.
Leave me alone next time,
The flag said with an attitude. Thank you, I called over my back. The flag sniffed and then shot up the pole, detaching itself to return to the clouds. I decided it was time to leave as well. I began to trot home. I had a ways to go, and the storm looked like a fast-moving system. I prayed I'd make it back in time. As my filthy boots pounded the skin-covered earth, I estimated I'd make it back to our meager shelter in about an hour if I kept up the pace. I prided myself on the shape I was in, my daily conditioning making for an effortless jaunt across the barren hills. The island was 10 miles north to south and roughly half that east to west. During our first year here, my brother and I had painstakingly traversed our new home, measuring out the distance with a 100-foot length of string. No trees or vegetation grew on the island. This place wasn't kind to anything that wished to grow and live. Instead, cold white bone jutted from the landscape, some of the formations rising hundreds of feet into the air along the northern edge. We called that part of the island the rib cage, and we rarely traveled to it. The middle and southern edge of the island mostly consisted of rolling hills, pink, hairy, and rancid. Our house was built of bone fragments and dried skin that we had sliced from the ground and dried beneath a sun we never saw. That was also where the tunnel was, the one and only exit off this rotting slab of meat. But we dared not go back. Not after what my brother had done. I picked up the pace as the wind began to chase me. Huffing, I shot a glance over my shoulder and saw the first blood-red bolt of lightning fork out from the wall of black clouds at my back. Thunder boomed ominously. A moment later, a deep rumbling snarl that echoed across the water. This was going to be a bad one. 30 minutes into my run, I passed the gore pole the flag had seen my brother pass. There was no sign of him, though. Frustrated, I pushed on, my socks wet with blood that seeped in from the battered soles of my boots. The island always bled the worst before a storm. Heart pounding, blood thumping in my ears, I went into an all-out sprint as more thunder cracked the air. I knew the tunnel wasn't ready for a storm of this caliber. It had barely healed from the last one, a mere 2 weeks earlier. I mentally ran through what we had left in our cobbled supplies, trying to think of anything that could help sustain the tunnel. I crested a hill 20 minutes later and saw our shelter about half a mile in the distance. I also saw someone walking through the marsh that populated the acreage to the left of it. It was my brother. Thank God. Sweat staining my shirt, I pushed the final distance at a dead run, the sky filling with flashes of red lightning. I reached the house the same time my brother did. He was holding 2 buckets filled with gunk from the marsh. "Where have you been?" I asked breathlessly, skidding to a halt in front of him. My brother wiped sweat from his pale face, his long dark hair framing his worn, tired face. He was 2 years older than me, but he looked like he was pushing 40, not 32. "Massive storm coming," he said, nodding toward the border of black cloud at my back. "Yeah, I noticed. What do you have there?" My brother hefted the buckets. "Mud from the marsh. I figure we can mix it with the bone powder we made yesterday and smother the tunnel walls with it where it's still healing. It's not much, but maybe it'll offer some protection. We don't have many supplies left. We haven't had time." "I know," I said, nodding. "Did you get any bait?" "No." "What the fuck were you doing all morning then?" My brother looked at the ground. "Doesn't matter." I took a step toward him. "Were you talking to the flags again?" "We don't have time for this right now." "Are you seriously still trying to find a way up there?" I asked, jamming a finger toward the clouds overhead. "Rennie, we need to see to the tunnel. We can argue about this later." "Fuck me," I muttered angrily. "You could have at least brought back a couple dead horrors for the big bastards to eat." "Hopefully there won't be any big ones today." "Did you see the size of that storm?" I scoffed. "We're going to get pounded in here in about an hour." My brother dropped the buckets, his anger rising. "Then cut the shit and help me. You want to stand there lecturing me, or do you want to try and help me stop the fucking apocalypse?" "God damn it," I growled, grabbing a bucket. My brother went inside for the bone powder while I hurried to the back of the house where the tunnel grew. As I rounded the house, my heart skipped a beat. The tunnel looked terrible. It grew from the ground like a hose made from flesh. Its walls were covered in angry red veins and bruising. The wire cord stitching along its curved exterior still looked infected despite our best efforts. The entrance to the tunnel was 10 feet from top to bottom, but it was covered by puckered skin that retracted to the touch, revealing the long 30-foot throat that led into the ground. Back to reality. Back to where everyone else was. The tunnel was massive at the base, looking more like a funnel. If one of the bigger horrors wanted to, it could tear the tunnel out of the ground, leaving a 100-foot hole for them to pour through. So far that hadn't happened, but the horrors were learning, getting smarter each time they came, each time they found us. Usually we had bait to distract them, smaller, dead horrors that we collected from the beach. We impaled them on poles a quarter mile around the house and prayed the big ones would just eat their own and return to the depths. But we hadn't had time since the last storm to gather them. We had spent all our time fixing the tunnel, stitching it, covering it in mud and bone powder, which seemed to heal it. The last attack had been the worst, but thankfully the storm had been short-lived, passing over us and dragging the monsters back into the ocean as it went. But the damage had been done. They had sliced and battered and carved the tunnel into a critical state, and when my brother and I emerged from the house afterwards, we felt sick as we gazed upon it. Pus, blood, lacerations, tears. It was a small mercy the storm hadn't brought one of the big ones, or it could have been the end of our feeble resistance. "Here, mix this in with the mud from the marsh," my brother said, coming to my side, snapping my attention back to the present. More thunder boomed over the island, and the wind nearly choked me in a rancid gust. I snatched the wooden bowl from my brother and dumped the white powder into the mud. I mixed it vigorously with my hands and then hurried over to the tunnel. "Cover the stitching," I called. "At least we can hide where the exterior is weakest. It won't have time to absorb the mud and bone before the storm comes, but maybe we can at least keep the horrors from hitting the same place twice." My brother began to work on the opposite side of the long flesh tube, and we worked in silence as the storm raged on the opposite side of the island. I could hear the distant waves pounding the sand on the southern shore just a few hills from the house. It sounded like hammers striking rock, not water on sand. I finished smearing the mud across some stitching and then moved down the length of the tunnel to the next patched wound. I went to work again, the hairs standing on the back of my neck as more red lightning lashed out to the north like a great whip punishing the land. When my bucket was empty, I ran to the entrance of the tunnel, which looked like a hollow, uncircumcised penis. My brother was already there, covering the puckered flesh with the rest of the mud. "Do we have any more bone poles we can place?" I asked hurriedly. He shook his head. "No, we have nothing. Everything was used up last time." He slammed his bucket down on the ground angrily. "God damn it, we need more time. This isn't going to hold. We have no bait, no poles to armor the tunnel. The stitching is still healing. We are fucked, Rennie. Fucked." The air cackled with electricity as lightning cut a path through the sky, the storm wall breaching the northern shores of the island now. "There has to be something else." The words died in my throat as a monstrous roar shook the island, bellowed from the depths of the black clouds. It started as a low growl and then rose into an ear-splitting screech that slammed into my skull like a hatchet. I covered my ears, wincing in pain, squeezing my eyes shut as the echoes of the call faded. I blinked slowly, lowering my hands. My brother stared north, his face paling. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "What the hell was that?" I asked, eyes wide. My brother turned to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. The rain had started, freezing ice that splattered across my face. "We should get inside. They'll be here soon." I looked at the approaching storm front. It looked like the northern part of the island had gone to night, the tar-thick clouds spitting out angry bolts of red lightning followed by booming thunder that rattled my teeth. The wind threw the rain against us, picking up intensity in a matter of seconds. "Look," I whispered hoarsely, pointing. Even from this distance, we could see hundreds of smaller horrors being tossed out of the storm front, expelled from the depths like vomit. "The storm must have sucked them out of the ocean," my brother said, his voice shaking. "Jesus, I've never seen it this bad before." Another deafening roar shook the island, a cataclysmic bellow that crescendoed into a screeching howl. And from the wall of night, I saw one titanic leg step out of the gale, a building-sized terror hundreds of feet high. Before the rest of the horror emerged, I grabbed my brother by the shoulders and spun him to face me. "This is it," I croaked. "Nothing is going to survive this one. We've known this was coming for weeks now, and there isn't anything we can do to stop it." I pointed to the tunnel. "We have to get out of here. We have to go back home. We are going to die if we stick around." My brother's face hardened. "Go home? You want us to go back? After all this time?" "Look what's coming!" "I am," he roared, his eyes bulging. "I see it, Rennie, and it'll all be right behind us if we go back. Leaving won't matter. They're going to make it through this time. I'd rather die here than watch what they do to everyone else." He stepped toward me, his eyes bloodshot now. "Can you imagine how they'll rip through the world? Can you picture that? Kids, all of them, torn and ripped and eaten and—" "I know!" I screamed into his face. "But at least there we'll have a better chance to get somewhere safe, have a shot at living." "We'd only live long enough to watch everything be destroyed, and then they'd come for us. It would only be a matter of time. You've seen these things. You know how they are. Hell, hasn't 5 years of surviving these horrors been enough to suck out any hope you have left? We are the only ones who have kept these fuckers at bay for as long as we have. It's a miracle they haven't made it through yet." I grabbed my brother by the shirt. "I don't want to fucking die here." My brother pushed me away angrily. "We're dead no matter what. Either stay here with me or crawl back home. Go ahead and put yourself through that nightmare. You'll die miserable and alone. At least here we'd have each other." "I should never have come here with you," I spat, panic ripping at my mind. The rain now soaked us, leaving me shivering and terrified. The crunch of thunder and booming footsteps of the colossal horrors nearly drowned out my voice. "I'm going inside," my brother yelled against the gale. I could tell I had hurt him. He turned but stopped, his face softening in the chaos. "Don't. Please don't leave me here alone. This is the end, and I'd rather die next to you here today. I don't want to spend the rest of my days running from the inevitable. I've done enough of that. It's what brought us here." I balled my hands into fists, indecision clawing at me. I glanced at the storm, at the horrors as they rapidly drew closer. There were 5 of the Titans now, each one so massive they disappeared into the blanket of cloud overhead, their enormous limbs striding closer with each passing moment. The smaller ones continued to spill out of the cloud wall, their screams and howls filling the sky. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting with myself. I was freezing. My head groaned. The noise of the approaching violence exploded through my skull. I set my jaw, feeling my chest relax. Fuck it. Dead was dead. "Let's go inside," I said, nearly blinded by the torrential rain. My brother offered me a grim smile and we ran into our meager house, the dried skin flopping angrily against the bone-spoked walls like a patchwork tent. We quickly went for the hole we had dug, pushed aside the bone benches and table we had carved. My brother heaved the slab that covered the hole to the side and we both dropped into the wet, stinking space. It was 4 feet deep, so we had to sit in the scabbed flesh pit. It was our only solace against the storms and had spent many days huddled there, waiting for the violence to pass. My brother pulled the slab back over us, encasing the small pit in gloom. We exchanged a look, and then our eyes rose to the low ceiling, waiting. The thunder continued to assault the skies, and the booming footsteps of the colossal horrors made the ground shake beneath us. The sound of rain lashing the walls of our home was immense, and the howl of wind rose to a scream. We began to hear the house above us come apart as the island bowed to the power of the storm and approaching horrors. Filthy rainwater dribbled in from the cracks between the slab above us, and something crashed and ripped away from the structures outside. "This is it," my brother said softly, his eyes dim. "They're almost here." The pit shuddered around us, and I found that I was terrified. I didn't want to die. I so badly did not want to die here. The reality that this was the end, that my life was over, hit me in a wave of grief so strongly that I felt my chest heave. I looked at my hands and saw they were shaking. My throat felt tight, and soon I was on the verge of tears as panic set in. My brother reached out and took my hand, his face calm. "It's okay, Rennie," he said gently as water continued to drip into the pit. "I got you. We're okay." I found myself miserably craving his comfort as we heard the approaching horde of horrors, big and small, crash over the house above. I huddled next to my brother, head down, eyes closed. The bone structures above us were torn from the ground and shattered as dozens of mutated, twisted feet thudded over the slab overhead, charging the tunnel. A great screeching roar blasted across the world, followed by the call of 2 others. Against my better judgment, I peeked through the crack in the slab. Passing directly overhead was one of the Titan horrors, its looming mass so huge it disappeared into the blanket of cloud overhead. It strode toward the tunnel, its long, otherworldly legs passing over the pit, encasing us in momentary darkness. And then we began to hear the horrors assault the tunnel. Their bellowing roars and screeching howls rose to a crescendo as excitement and hunger rippled through the ranks. I heard tearing and clawing as they beat their mangled bodies against the fragile tube of flesh, desperate to be rid of it, desperate to cross over, to go down, to reach the world that awaited on the other side. And then, all at once, we heard a great tearing sound. It was as if the fabric of the universe were being torn in half, a great, gory, all-consuming finality that left no doubt or question that the end was upon us. The horrors let out a sky-splitting roar of elation, and I felt my heart sink into the pit of my stomach. My blood ran cold, and I knew, after all these years, that my brother and I had failed. My God. I shivered, looking helplessly at my brother. My brother hugged me, and we waited to be found, exposed, and then gutted. It never came. I don't know how long we sat there as the hordes of horrors passed over us. I don't know why they never hunted us, found us, ripped the flesh from our bones. Maybe we were never really a concern to them. Maybe they didn't care about us. Maybe the tunnel was all that mattered to them and what awaited on the other side. Lost in the despair of my own thoughts, I jumped when my brother shook me. I gasped and snapped my eyes open, unwilling to accept that we were alive. I blinked in the shadows, soaked and soggy to my core, and then turned to my brother. "They're gone," he whispered, his lips blue with cold. He was shivering horribly. "They've all gone through." I squeezed my eyes shut and forced my internal engines to start again. I peeked through the crack in the slab and only saw cloud cover. The rain was still coming down hard, and I blinked against it. "Help me," I croaked, bracing the slab of bone against my back. Together, my brother and I lifted it, shoving it to the side as we stood. As I swept my eyes across the landscape, I felt myself go numb. The world was in ruin. The house had been destroyed, pieces of it littered across the ground in every direction. The skin-covered land had been churned and stomped into a great heaping wound, with bloody trails and seeping gashes marking a warpath across the island. My brother suddenly gripped my arm, his voice hoarse. "The tunnel." I knew before I even turned my head. When I did, I felt as if I would vomit. The tunnel had been uprooted and eviscerated, massive slabs of torn flesh cast and cut aside, leaving an enormous hole in the earth. A hole that marked the exit of every horror that had come. And now they had crossed over, back home. "How are we still alive?" My brother shuddered, turned his face up to the rain. "Why didn't they kill us?" "What's two when you can have billions?" I whispered, wiping trails of water off my face. Slowly, the two of us walked toward the hole. It was like sloshing through a war zone, each step a slog through gore and bloody bits of flesh. When we reached the hole, I looked down into the gaping abyss of darkness. A pit of black greeted me, and I was selfishly grateful I couldn't see or hear what was happening on the other side. My body suddenly felt too heavy for my legs, and I sat down hard next to the edge, rainwater streaming off the tip of my nose as my bloodshot eyes continued to gaze down into the maw. At my back, my brother's voice trembled. "I'm so sorry, Rennie." I said nothing, mind stripping away into pieces. "If I hadn't gotten into trouble, we wouldn't have had to run away to this place. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have dragged you into it." His hand found my shoulder. "I would have been dead years ago if you hadn't helped me, if you hadn't come with me, if we hadn't found this place together." He paused for a moment, and then, "I love you, Rennie. Thank you for not leaving me, ever. You deserve so much better than this." His words slid down my body like worms. I raised my face to respond, but the words died in my throat. Shock rippled through me. I raised my hand and pointed to the sky for my brother to look. Hundreds of flags were drifting down from the sky, gently, slowly, as if being lowered to the earth in the arms of the wind. They were all dead. I covered my face with my hands and began to cry. My brother sank to the ground next to me as the flags fell around us. Together, we waited to die, however it would come.